Um, okay, now we come on to our media picks for the month, and this month I've got. I know I always say this. I've got a short, sharp, quick thing, and we end up talking about it for half an hour. But this is hopefully short, sharp, and quick because this can't possibly go on for half an hour. It is a film that I watched at the beginning of the month called The Old Guard. It is based on a comic book. It is historical fiction. But what interests me about it is the ongoing question of what would I ask someone who was immortal? Or someone who had lived at the very least, maybe they don't have to be immortal, but someone who's lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The film revolves around a key group of people who are varying ages. The youngest of them at the beginning of the film, the youngest of them is 200 years old, right up to someone who's maybe even 7,000 years old, played by Charlize Theron. And the question of what it means to live like that and to see the world change around you, and this sort of thing is explored sometimes in vampire fiction. So, an interview with the vampire at one point, certainly in the film at least, you have Brad Pitt's character being approached by uh, Antonio Banderas' vampire saying, I need to be able to connect with the modern world. Help me. And that speaks to I think a realistic quandary. How do you live when everything that you're accustomed to changes and falls away? Not least the people that you love die. And in this film, there's a very strong relationship between two soldiers on opposite sides of the Crusades. That they have this deep. I mean, at one point, they're captured, and one of them is kind of mocked by the guys with guns. Going, "Is this your boyfriend?" And he's like, "My boyfriend." It's like, bitch, I've been alive for 1,000 years. This person is more than my boyfriend, like kind of thing. Um, which I think is
Yeah.
that's also beautiful as well. It speaks to this notion of being able to have deep, really deep human relationships over the course of millennia. So it's an interesting one. For me, it was a thought experiment. As an archaeologist slash historian type person, just to think what would it be like? What would it be like to live that long? But also, what on earth would I ask such a person? I mean, do you have any? Have you ever thought about this? What would you ask a medieval person or older, a Roman, if you could?
I trouble is, I'm one of those people, and I know we do these conversations, and I do interviews, and I've interviewed people and things like that. But I tend to be happy when I'm listening,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I'd rather eavesdrop on a conversation.
Okay. Okay.
I'd rather those those two people you know, chatting away about their perceptions about what they're seeing and earwigging on it.
Mm.
Um, Obviously, yeah, no, there's yeah, the, a lot of fiction and science fiction is predicated on things like what would you know what well, there was a famous novel, was it Joseph Heller, Life from Golgotha, which predicated being able to watch the crucifixion
Right. Okay.
and things like it's um, uh, yeah, and also
So in that sense, the MacGuffin doesn't interest
the
you
other
as
thing,
much then.
sorry, just it would interest me if it was a well done piece of entertainment
Hmm.
or a thriller or whatever. The actual premise, it's interesting, because I I'm just trying to think of a no, somebody from the past talking to me now, if they've lived for 1,000 years, I'm minded again of there's nothing you need to check more than the comments of an eyewitness.
Mm. Mm. Oh, I see. Yes, memory is a fickle thing and all that kind of.
Memory is fallible
Ah.
and mutable, and and it's perfectly possible for people to fake a memory without even being aware they're doing it.
Well, do you know what's interesting there is so obviously you're suggesting someone being unconscious of this, but also often the history that we receive is history which is which is has been formed in the telling. I'm not. I don't want to be so twee as to say history is written by the victors, but in a very real sense, the stories we inherit are shaped by the storytellers, and so in that sense,
Yeah.
one question would be to what extent would whoever you met want to fit in with the stories that because essentially they
Mm.
would have been part of the communities that have formed that history over time. Yeah, so in that sense, would they be countercultural? Would they go along with those histories? That's an
Oh,
interesting question,
yeah,
actually. Yeah, it comes down to this idea of
yeah.
primary, secondary sources, and so on and so forth. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, um, I don't follow the view that everything can be deconstructed and nothing is fact. I think
No.
there are facts. There's fact. Gravity is a fact,
Yeah.
but um, it, yeah, but history is multiple changeable timelines
Hmm.
and more than we can ever fully encompass in our own knowledge and understanding. So inevitably, we're editing what comes into us,
Hmm.
and creating a history that didn't exist before we began to analyze it.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, just because I did promise short and sweet. One of the things that I've often thought about along these lines was one day I was on the metro coming back from Newcastle, um, and it occurred to me,
Now that's metro rather than the Paris metro, which is romantic and
it,
one of, you can
it's
get
it's
to go
it's
out of
it's
town.
it's in Newcastle, not Yorkshire. Um,
Sorry, sorry.
but
Your
um,
metro.
yeah. See, I could do a Geordie accent, but I'm not going to because I don't want to offend anyone. Um, but the point is though, I was on the metro and I was looking around and the thought just occurred to me. One of these people could be like 1,500 years old, and I wouldn't know. And I found that really interesting, this idea of maybe going through, because over that sort of time, you could work your way into any position in life you wanted. You could become a king or a queen or you know, an art dealer or you could all sorts of things. You could learn any skill, given enough time. And I love the idea of someone eventually coming back to the point of, I just want to live in Wallsend. I just
Yeah.
I'm fed up of this. I'm just going to live in Wallsend for a couple of hundred years, see what happens. Um, and
Start off as a cobbler at Arberia and see how it goes from there.
exactly, exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
I think there's something quite nice about that as well. This idea
yeah.
of returning to
Although
something small. So go on.
yeah, although if you look at that as a trope in fantasy fiction and fantasy cinema and so on, Highlander is probably the most
Mm, mm,
one of the most famous ones where those stories are always about loss. Because
yes.
if you have a semblance, something like approaching an immortality, and you can see that you can live through that line, but the people you might grow to be with or care about or love
Depend upon.
can't go with you on that journey,
Mm,
and it's always there's always an element of tragedy about it.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and in that sense, I suppose just to round this off, then coming back to the film, The Old Guard, I would say it has
Yeah.
elements of Highlander in there because there's something. Uh, Highlander is probably one of my favorite films, probably in my top five if I had to name a top five.
One of
And
the reasons I mentioned it. I
well, for
thought it
one of the
might.
reasons that you mentioned it, but also actually because I think it's a very clever demonstration of what it would be like to be immortal. In so much
Yeah,
as for you, the
yeah,
past and the present are the same thing. Because actually, even just now, you were talking about how interviewing someone from the past. Well, they wouldn't be, would they? They'd be from the past, and they'd be now. You see what I mean?
exactly. And that's why I was talking about. That's why I was talking about memory and the fallibilism of memory.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, precisely. Yeah, yeah. And so in the case of seeing Connor McLeod having modern events. So the big one would be well, no. So the first one would be in the wrestling rink when he's
mm.
ring when he's seeing this pseudo combat occur, and in his head he's remembering when he was actually on a battlefield, leading up to the day that he was almost killed by someone. For
Yeah.
him, that's his life. That's just one life, and so there's elements of that in this film. What I would say is that, of course, Charlize Theron's been in things like Atomic Blonde, so she's worked with the same people behind John Wick, and lots of that comes in. to play through the action, but I would say that the cinematography is not up to speed. It's not as good as John Wick or Atomic Blonde. So sometimes you will see these very dramatic, gun fu moves. Yeah, these very sort of martial arts combined with gun handling, and which
Yeah,
aren't being filmed in the same punchy way, and therefore you sort of see through the technique a little bit. No,
yeah.
maybe I'm noticing that because I really appreciate the cinematography of those other films. So for me, I was a little bit let down on the action side of things. But Mrs. Soup loved it. Mrs. Soup's parents have since watched it, and they agree it was a rip roaring jaunt. So worth watching, and for me, a bit of a thought experiment. I know that wasn't brief. That wasn't brief at all. But let's go into
I
your
will.
media pick.
I will. I will be brief. I will be brief.
One day I'll be brief. One
I,
day I'll just be like Monty Python's Life of Brian. You know why?
I think. Yeah, yeah. Perhaps we should retitle it sort of watching brief, um, you know, brackets ironic
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yes. Watching not
So,
brief.
yes, watching. Insert not. Yeah. No, I'm going to be brief. I'm going to talk about the resurrection of UK TV history, which became yesterday. Um, the digital TV channel, certainly available in the UK, on Freeview and also on platforms like BT and Sky.
Mm.
As I want to just highlight the resurrection of yesterday as a broadcaster which commissions its own material, and some of it's actually rather good.
Okay.
It started off yesterday. Started off as a channel which was basically back catalogue BBC and a few
Mm.
other Channel 4 and so on documentaries.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and
but
also, just so I guess it just because someone abroad might be interested in this, in so much as
yes,
these digital channels are the spaces where the public broadcasting entities in the UK can sell their programming and essentially make a profit because actually adverts are on these channels as well. Whereas, for example, on the BBC,
absolutely.
there are no adverts. So it's an interesting, weird. I've always found it a bit odd the way that our live TV license money essentially is seeding a commercial network in that sense. But there's a
Well,
whole circuitous route to get there.
there's a yeah, no, there's a whole ecosystem
Yeah.
of digital channels that buy up content,
Yeah.
and so for example, a documentary I was involved in making in a re-edit with my bit cut out,
Oh.
um, popped up on Smithsonian the other night.
Oh, really?
It was
Okay.
obviously, yeah. So there's a constant re-editing and revoicing and repackaging and reselling of documentary content around the world.
Hmm.
So, for example, a documentary will be, it'll be voiced by Tony Robinson in Britain. It'll be voiced by an American actor for an American market, and by a Chinese actor for the Chinese market, language
Right.
market. These programs are increasingly made for international audience and for international sales, and they're designed to have bits that could be slotted in.
And so,
Um,
well, and so, sorry, I'm just interested now. And so is
Go on.
that then similar to the way that children's TV programs are often made? So there's a reason that Teletubbies and other sort of pe small puppeted kind of costume things are useful, is that they don't have animated mouths. You can change the language very easily. You can
Precisely,
chop it up and use it in Turkey, in China, in Australia. It doesn't.
precisely
Right,
that.
right. I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The less you're actually tied to a physicality, the more options you've got of actually selling that content elsewhere.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
And yeah, and so uh,
So one more thing then. Does that mean,
go.
in your experience then, does that mean that such documentaries, when they're bought, come with the associated footage library? So if they need to extend a section because just in that language it takes longer to say something or whatever, they can monkey with the footage in a more rounded way, or do you not know about that?
That is a very good question. I don't know exactly. I mean, it depends. For example, some shows will be subtitled, although more often they'll be revoiced,
Hmm.
or dubbed. I mean, I watched a Time Watch documentary I was trying to track down once. Um, I've only managed to find in a version that was dubbed into Hungarian on
Right.
YouTube.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
so um, yeah, but
So I completely got you off topic there.
yeah, no, no,
Like,
it is fascinating. All I was,
but they're
but
commissioning their own programs.
they're commissioning their own stuff. Some of it, and some of it is actually very good.
Hmm.
Two shows in particular that they've got into a sort of industrial archaeology shtick
Okay.
recently.
Hmm.
And there's two shows in particular I'd like to point out that people might enjoy. And again, there's a link back to our previous discussion about the mayor. And the problems the American Anthropological Association got into, and the visual imagery of decayed Mayan cities.
Hmm.
Um, it's a series called Abandoned Engineering,
Mm.
um, which takes sometimes massive structures like the television tower in East Berlin, dams, factories, which um, exist in a state of decay, for want of a better word,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it sets out to explain how these things are both monuments to technology and to design, but also to histories, which means that for whatever reason, whether it's politics or money or technology or whatever, they no longer have a reason to be.
Mm.
So they're just there, and they're just there as witnesses to what they once were and
I
what
think
we
I think
want to make of them now. And
I
it's
think I might
fascinating.
have seen one that was about maybe an Amazonian highway,
Mm,
possibly a project to try and build a raised motorway in
yeah,
Brazil. That again came out of very specific economic circumstances. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And there's another one I picked up an episode of last night. It's called War Factories. So it's quite a sort of they like to do war. The joke was it used to be called UKTV Hitler because they had so many programs about World War Two
Do
on
you know,
it.
do you know, I was going to say, yeah, yesterday, aka the Nazis were bad channel. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, but no, this particular one is called War Factories. But it's about the untold story. It's all very well to do another documentary about the Battle of Britain or about Arnhem.
Hmm.
Um, but what they've said actually is more. It's there's an interesting backstory here. For example, the one I was looking at last night, it was the effect of oil on the campaigns in the Eastern Front. Why Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in the first place, which was partly for Lebensraum, but it was also to gain control of the oil fields in the Caucasus.
Ah, yes. Okay. Hmm.
And the fact that he didn't gain control of the oil fields in the Caucasus meant that Soviet tanks had the oil to get to Berlin.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see. So examining
Uh,
these small either way sort of knife edge type things.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Mm.
and but also about the phenomenal efforts that were, you know, 20th century total war meant that societies had to engage in. So, for example, the famous example is the moving of the Soviet munitions factories um, east of the Urals to get
Mm.
them away from the
A range of
German
bombers and things.
advance
Yeah.
and the range of German bombers.
Mm.
But also, the shadow factories in the UK, which meant that if the supermarine plant in Southampton was bombed, they could still carry on building Spitfires in Castle Bromwich and other, metal bashing shops around the
Mm.
country.
Interesting.
So good, these they're good chunky programs, good talking heads. They talk to engineers, talk to archaeologists, talk to historians, and then so there's a nice range of voices. Um, some female voices even in War Factories, which is unusual in these kind of documentaries and good to be seen. So yeah, Abandoned Engineering and War Factories on yesterday, available in the UK, and hopefully on other platforms around the world.
Okay, right, cool. Well, I'll keep an eye out for that. I tend to avoid yesterday like the plague, but if you say it's starting to change, I will take a look.
There's
Um,
yeah. Actually there's also a hilarious. I just mentioned in passing a series called Medieval Murder Mysteries, which
right.
is done really cheaply and some really really cheesy reconstructions. It's absolutely brilliant. If you want to, you want 5 minutes with a cup of coffee and some popcorn, then Medieval Murder Mysteries as well.
Okay, cool, cool. Thank you. Well, we've done it. Another month's watching brief or not watching not so brief is over, and we look forward to what comes next. Um, I suppose just we should just flag up the possibility of this of a special with regards to the planning process. Do we know if and when any conclusions might come about on that, or uh,
No, well, the white paper came out last night. People are responding to it as we speak, and we took a break in recording just now, and I was looking at what's going on Twitter.
mhm,
Um, it's going to be a while before the major organisations start to respond.
mhm, mhm,
Archaeology archaeological organisations are notoriously slow to respond to these things. They take a while to think about what they want to say and how they want to say it.
okay,
Um, but so they'll be making submissions to the and so on. But I think we will yeah we will I think need to do a special just to flag up the issues and so that people can see how it develop how the argument develops over the next 3 to 6 months.
okay. We'll keep an eye on it. Grand. Well, as ever, until next time, guys, at home, abroad, in the past, in the future, or even indeed if you're 1,000 years old. Take care.
I can't think of a single question for you. I'm sorry.
No, I'll write some down. It'll be fine. Okay. Bye bye.
Yeah, Mark will do it. I'll listen. Cheerio.